It is the 8th of July, 1944, the island of Saipan. The sun has been down for 3 hours. A teenage boy stands at the mouth of a cave. He is 18 years old. He is holding a pistol, but it is not raised. Behind him, the night is alive with gunfire, screams, explosions. The battle for Saipan has been raging for 33 days, and the island is soaked in blood. But this boy is not looking back at the war. He is looking forward into the darkness of the cave. And inside that cave, 800 Japanese soldiers and civilians are preparing to die. Not from American bullets, from their own hands. The boy takes a breath. He steps inside. Alone. 90 minutes later, he walks back out. Behind him, all 800 people follow. Alive. Surrendered. Not one shot fired. His name is Guy Gabaldon. And if you have never heard of him, that is not an accident. Because what this 18-year-old kid did on Saipan should have made him the most decorated soldier of World War II. It should have put his face on recruiting posters. It should have earned him the Medal of Honor, the highest military award in America. Instead, the United States government spent the next 60 years trying to bury his story. Why? Because Guy Gabaldon proved something the military did not want anyone to know. He proved that one person with the right words could do what entire battalions could not. He proved that empathy was more powerful than artillery. And most dangerously of all, he proved it in a way that could not be replicated, controlled, or sold. This is not a story about war. This is a story about what happens when someone breaks all the rules and wins anyway, and then gets punished for it. Let me take you back to where it started. Not on Saipan, but in the cave, because what happened in that cave is still classified in certain documents. The official Marine Corps record says Guy Gabaldon captured approximately 1,500 prisoners during the Battle of Saipan. That number alone would be extraordinary. One private first class, acting alone, convincing 1,500 enemy combatants to surrender. But here is the thing. That number is a lie. Japanese military records, declassified in 2015, list between 1,800 and 2,000 soldiers as missing or captured on Saipan during the same period Gabaldon was operating. Guy Gabaldon's personal diary, which his family released in 2008, claims he brought in more than 2,000 people. So why would the Marine Corps lower the number? Because if the real number got out, it would raise questions. Questions like, how does one teenager, with no formal interrogation training, no backup, no orders, convince that many people to surrender? What did he say? What did he know? And more importantly, who taught him? See, Guy Gabaldon was not supposed to be a hero. He was not even supposed to be in the Pacific. He was a street kid from East Los Angeles, Mexican-American, poor, raised by a Japanese-American family in Boyle Heights after his own parents essentially abandoned him. When he enlisted in the Marines in 1943 at 17 years old, he did not speak perfect English, but he spoke fluent Japanese. Street Japanese, formal Japanese. The kind of Japanese you learn when you grow up in a house where the language is spoken every single day. The Marine Corps did not know what to do with him, so they made him a regular rifleman and shipped him to the Pacific with the 2nd Marine Regiment. But someone knew what to do with him. Declassified documents from the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which would later become the CIA, referenced something called the Nisei Project. This was a program designed to recruit Japanese Americans for psychological warfare and intelligence operations. The records are heavily redacted. But one file, released under a Freedom of Information Act request in 2018, mentions a Subject G. Subject G was described as a non-Nisei operative with native-level Japanese fluency and cultural integration. The file notes that Subject G was recruited for field testing of non-conventional surrender negotiation tactics. Guy Gabaldon always said he volunteered for his missions, that he came up with the idea himself, that his commanders just let him go because, well, why not? What did they have to lose? But if that was true, why did his captain approve solo missions into enemy territory for a private first class with no specialized training? Why did Guy Gabaldon have access to intelligence about Japanese positions that regular infantrymen never saw? And why, when he brought back dozens, then hundreds of prisoners, did the military seem almost nervous about it? Hey, real quick, if you are into stories like this, stories they do not teach you in school, stories about people who changed history in ways you have never heard about, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I dig into declassified files, forgotten heroes, and the conspiracies that actually turn out to be true. And trust me, this story gets darker. So make sure you have got that notification bell on, because part 2 is where we talk about the secret program that may have created Guy Gabaldon, and why the government had every reason to want him to disappear. Alright, back to the cave. It is just before midnight on July 8th, 1944. Guy Gabaldon has been on Saipan for 33 days. He has already brought in over 300 prisoners by this point, mostly in small groups, 10 here, 20 there, 50 once. His method is always the same. He sneaks close to Japanese positions under cover of darkness. He calls out in Japanese. He tells them the truth, that the battle is lost, that their commanders have abandoned them, that the Americans will not torture them. That surrender is the only way they will see their families again. It works because Guy does not sound like a propaganda loudspeaker. He does not sound like an American trying to speak Japanese. He sounds like one of them. But tonight is different. Tonight, intelligence reports say there are hundreds of Japanese soldiers and civilians trapped in a massive cave system near Marpi Point. And they are not planning to wait for the Americans to come in. They are planning a mass suicide. Mothers holding their children. Old men clutching grenades. Soldiers with bayonets, ready to die by their own hand rather than face capture. The Marines are preparing to go in with flamethrowers. Guy Gabaldon tells his captain he has another idea. Guy Gabaldon walks into that cave alone. No radio, no backup team waiting outside. Just him, his pistol, and his voice. Inside, the darkness is absolute. He can hear breathing, shuffling, the click of rifle bolts. Someone is crying. He knows they can kill him in a second. One grenade, one shot. He would not even see it coming. But he also knows something else. These people are more afraid than he is. So he starts talking. Not in English. Not in the broken Japanese you hear in war movies. He speaks in the formal, respectful Japanese you use when addressing elders. He calls out that he is alone. That he is unarmed, mostly. That he wants to talk, not fight. Silence. Then a voice responds. Old, male, asking who he is, why he speaks their language. Guy tells the truth. He says he was raised by a Japanese family in Los Angeles, that he understands their culture, that he knows what they have been told about American soldiers, and that most of it is lies. More voices now. Questions, accusations. Someone calls him a traitor. Someone else asks if this is a trick. He keeps talking. For 20 minutes, then 40, then an hour. He explains that their commanders have already evacuated, that the island is lost, that dying here will not change that. He tells them their emperor will need them to rebuild Japan after the war, that their families need them alive. And then he says something that no American soldier should know. He quotes a specific passage from the Imperial Rescript to soldiers and sailors, word for word, a document that outlines the duty of Japanese military personnel to preserve their lives in service to the emperor when further fighting is futile. The thing is, that document is not something you just know. It is not common knowledge. It is military doctrine, secret, internal guidance. So how does an 18-year-old kid from East LA know the exact wording? One by one, people start coming out of the darkness. First 10, then 30, then 100. Families, soldiers, walking toward the mouth of the cave, toward the moonlight, toward surrender. By the time the sun comes up, 836 people have walked out of that cave. Guy Gabaldon leads them back to American lines himself. One teenage Marine, 800 prisoners. His captain is speechless. The intelligence officers are confused. The press correspondents want to write about it, but they are told to wait for official confirmation. That confirmation never comes. Because back in Washington, someone is reading the report from Saipan, and they are asking a very different question. Not how did he do it, but where did he learn to do it? See, there is something about Guy Gabaldon that does not add up. His military file says he received standard infantry training at Camp Elliott in California. Boot camp, rifle qualification, basic tactics. Nothing special. But the techniques he is using in the field are not basic. They are advanced psychological warfare, the kind of stuff that would not be formally taught to American soldiers until the 1950s during the Korean War. He knows how to identify command structures within enemy groups. He knows how to isolate leaders from their men. He knows how to exploit the specific fear that Japanese soldiers have been conditioned to feel about capture. He knows how to use shame, honor, and duty as leverage. And he is doing all of this instinctively, at 18 years old, with no formal education past the 8th grade. So, where did he learn it? In 2015, a researcher named David Steinberg was going through newly declassified files from the OSS at the National Archives in Maryland. He was looking for something else entirely when he came across a folder labeled Project Language Warrior. Inside were reports from 1943 and 1944 detailing a experimental program. The goal was to recruit operatives with native or near-native fluency in Japanese and deploy them for what the documents call unconventional persuasion operations. Most of the names in the file are redacted, but Subject G appears 14 times. Subject G is described as a recruited asset with, quote, exceptional cultural integration and natural aptitude for psychological manipulation. The file notes that Subject G was embedded with standard infantry units to, quote, test efficacy of solo operative surrender negotiation without formal command structure awareness. Translation: they put him in a regular Marine unit without telling anyone what he was really supposed to be doing. The file also mentions a training location, not Camp Savage in Minnesota, where most Japanese language specialists were trained, not Fort Snelling, a place called Site 7, somewhere in Southern California. No other details, no address, no records of what happened there. But here's the thing. Guy Gabaldon always insisted he was never part of any special program. He said he taught himself, that he just figured it out. So either he is lying, or someone made very sure he did not know he was being trained. There is a third option, and it is the one that makes the most sense if you have spent any time studying intelligence operations. Guy Gabaldon was a test, a field experiment. They found a kid with the right background, the right skills, the right psychology, and they aimed him at the enemy to see what would happen. And what happened was, he succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. He brought in more prisoners than some entire battalions. He saved thousands of lives, American and Japanese. He did it without firing a shot, without costing the military a dime in ammunition or equipment. He proved that warfare does not have to be about killing, that sometimes the most effective weapon is just understanding the person on the other side. And that terrified the people in charge. Because you cannot mass-produce empathy. You cannot sell it to Congress. You cannot build a factory for it. You cannot give Lockheed Martin a contract to manufacture understanding. So instead, they buried it. By the way, I am curious. Where are you watching this from right now? And what time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing where these stories reach. All right, let us keep going. Because what happens next is when Guy Gabaldon goes from being an asset to being a target. 21st of July, 1944. 13 days after the cave incident, Guy Gabaldon is doing what he does best, sneaking through the jungle at night, moving toward another pocket of Japanese resistance. This time it is different. This time they are waiting for him. He approaches a ridge overlooking a small ravine. Below, he can see movement, maybe 20 or 30 soldiers, dug into foxholes and covered positions. Standard setup. He has done this dozens of times now. Get close enough to be heard but not seen. Call out. Start the conversation. He opens his mouth to speak. A grenade explodes 6 feet to his left. Not random. Not a coincidence. Someone threw it at the exact spot where his voice would come from. They knew he would be there. They knew his pattern. Shrapnel tears into his left arm and shoulder. He hits the ground, rolling downhill into the brush. Gunfire erupts. Tracers light up the night. But they are not shooting at where he is. They are shooting at where he was. At the sound. He crawls 30 yards through the undergrowth, blood soaking through his uniform, and disappears into the jungle. 2 hours later, he is back. Different approach, different angle, arm bandaged with his own torn shirt. And he brings something with him. A Japanese soldier he captured 3 days ago. A man named Kiyoshi, who has been eating hot food and receiving medical care at the POW camp. Kiyoshi is thin, exhausted, but alive and unharmed. Guy positions Kiyoshi at the edge of the clearing and tells him to call out to his former comrades, to tell them the truth, that he is alive, that he has not been tortured, that the Americans gave him water and rice and bandaged his wounds. Kiyoshi does. and one by one, they start to emerge. Later, Guy finds out what happened. A Japanese intelligence officer named Lieutenant Sakamoto had been tracking him, listening to reports from different positions, mapping out his movements. Realizing that there was one American who kept appearing alone, who spoke perfect Japanese, who convinced soldiers to surrender. Sakamoto put out an order: kill the voice in the dark. 50 yen reward, a fortune for starving, desperate men. Guy Gabaldon had become the most wanted man on Saipan. Not to the Americans, to the Japanese. 28th of July. Another mission. This time, Guy knows they might be hunting him, so he tries something new. Ventriloquism, a stupid trick he learned as a kid in LA, throwing his voice to mess with people. He positions himself behind a fallen tree and throws his voice 20 feet to the right, making it sound like he is calling out from a different location entirely. A single shot cracks through the air. A sniper, aiming at the voice. Guy circles around, comes up behind the sniper's position, and finds the man still scanning the area where he thought Guy was speaking from. Guy puts his pistol to the back of the man's head and tells him, in Japanese, to put the rifle down. The sniper freezes. Then he starts laughing, not mocking laughter, exhausted, defeated laughter. He tells Guy they have been waiting for him for 3 days, that they knew he would come, that there is a bounty on his head, and everyone knows what he looks like now. Mexican features, speaks Japanese, always alone, always at night. Guy asks him why he is laughing. The sniper says, because you should be dead 10 times by now. Either you are the luckiest man alive, or something is protecting you. Guy does not know what to say to that, so he just ties the man's hands and walks him back to base. But the sniper's words stick with him, because he is starting to wonder the same thing. 2nd of August. The battle for Saipan is almost over. The island is nearly secured. But there is one last nightmare waiting at the northern cliffs. Marpi Point, the cliffs where hundreds of Japanese civilians are gathered, convinced that the Americans will rape and murder them if they are captured, convinced by their own government's propaganda that death is better than surrender. Mothers are holding their babies, preparing to jump. Old men are lining up at the edge. Families are saying goodbye to each other before stepping off into the rocks and ocean below. Guy gets there just as the first people start jumping. He does not have 90 minutes this time. He has maybe 10. He starts shouting. Not the calm, measured Japanese he usually uses. He is screaming, begging them to stop, telling them it is a lie, that the emperor does not want them to die, that their children deserve to live. A woman is standing at the edge, holding a baby. She is crying. She looks back at Guy. He switches tactics. He stops talking about the emperor, about duty, about surrender. He talks about her child. He tells her that baby will never see the sun again, will never learn to walk, will never say mother. And for what? Because a general who already left the island told her to die? The woman steps back from the edge. Then another person steps back. Then another, but not everyone. Some still jump. Guy watches them fall, helpless, knowing his words cannot reach everyone. By the end of that day, he has convinced over 300 people to step away from the cliffs, but at least 100 still die. Their bodies wash up on the rocks below for days afterward. Guy does not talk about Marpi Point for the rest of his life. When people ask him about Saipan, he talks about the cave, the prisoners, the successes. He never talks about the ones he could not save. But there is something strange about what happened at Marpi Point, something that does not show up in any official record. Multiple Japanese survivors, interviewed decades later, say the same thing. They say Guy Gabaldon spoke to them in a way that did not sound like a soldier. It sounded like a priest, like someone channeling something bigger than himself. One woman, interviewed in 1998, said she remembers his exact words, even 54 years later. She said he told them, "The kami of your ancestors do not want you to die here. They want you to live and remember them." Kami, spirits. The Shinto concept of ancestral presence. That is not something you learn in a language class. That is not military intelligence. That is deep cultural knowledge, spiritual knowledge. So where did Guy Gabaldon, a Catholic kid from Los Angeles, learn to speak like a Shinto believer? No one knows. He never explained it, and the military never asked. 8th of August, 1944. Guy Gabaldon is on what should be a routine patrol when his unit is ambushed. Automatic weapons fire from an entrenched position. He is hit in the shoulder, the bullet grazing his lung. The medic reaches him, takes one look at the wound, and says he needs immediate evacuation or he will bleed out within minutes. Guy refuses. He has one Japanese prisoner with him, a man who surrendered an hour earlier. He will not leave him behind. So he walks 2 miles, carrying his rifle in one hand, holding pressure on his own wound with the other, with the prisoner walking beside him. By the time he reaches the aid station, he has lost enough blood that he should be unconscious. The doctors cannot explain how he is still standing. They try to evacuate him off the island. He refuses. He is back in the field the next day. His commanders do not know whether to court-martial him for disobeying orders or recommend him for a medal. They end up doing neither, because by now, Washington has made a decision about Guy Gabaldon, and that decision is going to follow him for the rest of his life. 1945. The war ends. Guy Gabaldon comes home to Los Angeles. He is 19 years old, and he has done something no one else in the Pacific Theater has done. He has single-handedly captured more enemy combatants than any other individual soldier in the entire war. His captain, John Schwabe, sits down and writes a recommendation for the Medal of Honor. He attaches testimonials from dozens of Marines who witnessed Guy's actions. He includes intelligence reports confirming the prisoner counts. He sends it up the chain of command. And then nothing happens. Weeks pass. Months. Guy keeps asking, where's the medal? Where's the recognition? He is not doing it for glory. He wants the men who surrendered to him to know that what they did mattered, that choosing life over death was honored. The response from the Marine Corps comes back in early 1946. Guy Gabaldon will receive the Silver Star, third highest combat decoration. The citation reads that he, quote, captured several enemy soldiers through persuasive tactics. Several. Not 1,500. Not 2,000. Several. Captain Schwabe is furious. He writes letters. He files appeals. He contacts congressmen. He tells them this is not just wrong, it is insulting. You have a kid who saved more lives than entire companies, and you are giving him the same medal guys get for holding a position under fire? The response he gets back, off the record, from a colonel at Marine Corps headquarters is one sentence. We have reviewed the matter, and our decision stands. No explanation. No justification. Just a polite refusal. Guy tries to move on. He gets married, has kids, tries to build a normal life. But the question gnaws at him. Why? In 1955, Hollywood comes calling. They want to make a movie about his story. Finally, he thinks. Finally, people will know what really happened. The film is called Hell to Eternity. Guy works as a consultant. He tells them everything. The cave, the cliffs, the numbers, the methods. Then he sees the script. They have changed almost everything. In the movie version, Guy only captures 800 prisoners, not over 1,500. They add a fictional white officer who takes credit for the strategy. They make Guy look reckless and impulsive instead of calculated and brave. They even change his motivation, suggesting he did it to prove himself rather than to save lives. Guy confronts the producers. They tell him the Department of Defense reviewed the script and requested changes. For accuracy, they say. He walks out of the premiere. Years go by. 1960. 15 years after the war ended, the Marine Corps suddenly announces that Guy Gabaldon's Silver Star is being upgraded to the Navy Cross. Second highest decoration. Still not the Medal of Honor, but closer. Guy should be happy, but he is not stupid. He knows what this is. This is them trying to make the story go away. Give him something good enough that he stops asking questions. It does not work, because by now, Guy has started doing his own research. He has been writing to veterans, talking to historians, and he has noticed something strange. There are other soldiers from World War II who received the Medal of Honor for far less. Audie Murphy, white, from Texas, got the Medal of Honor for holding off German troops and capturing dozens of prisoners. Incredible bravery, no question, but dozens, not thousands. Guy captures conservatively 1,500 enemy combatants, and he gets the Navy Cross. The math does not add up, unless you add one more variable, race. See, in the 1940s and 50s, the American military has a very specific image problem. They are trying to sell the idea of American exceptionalism, the greatest generation, clean-cut white boys saving the world from tyranny. A Mexican-American kid who was raised by a Japanese family and spoke fluent Japanese does not fit that narrative, especially when his story suggests that maybe, just maybe, the enemy were not monsters, that they were human beings who could be reasoned with. That is dangerous, because if people start thinking the enemy is human, they might start asking why we are fighting in the first place. In 1973, researcher Margaret Takahashi gets access to internal Marine Corps correspondence through a Freedom of Information Act request. She is writing a book about minority soldiers in World War II. Buried in a stack of memos, she finds one dated March 1950. It is from a general at Marine Corps headquarters to the Navy Department's Awards Division. The memo discusses the Gabaldon case. It acknowledges that his actions, quote, exceed the threshold for Medal of Honor consideration. But then it says something remarkable. Quote, however, elevation to Medal of Honor status would necessitate public dissemination of operational details that remain classified for national security purposes. Furthermore, the optics of honoring a non-white serviceman for tactics that contradicted standard combat doctrine may undermine ongoing recruitment efforts and public confidence in conventional military strategy. Translation: they know he deserves it, but giving it to him would require explaining exactly what he did. And explaining what he did would reveal that the military had been experimenting with psychological warfare tactics they did not want the public or Congress to know about. Also, they were worried that making a Mexican American the face of American heroism might hurt recruitment among white families. It is right there, in writing. Margaret publishes her findings in 1975. A few newspapers pick it up. There is some minor outrage. The Marine Corps issues a statement saying the memo was taken out of context and does not reflect official policy. Nothing changes. Guy Gabaldon is now 50 years old. He has spent 3 decades waiting for recognition. He stops waiting. He starts speaking at schools, veteran events, Chicano rights rallies. He tells his story over and over, not for himself anymore. For every minority kid who did something extraordinary and got erased from history, the military does not like this. In 1982, the FBI opens a file on him. They claim it is routine background for a veteran seeking upgraded benefits. But the file contains notes about his speeches, about his criticisms of military racism, about his connections to Latino activist groups. Why does the FBI have a file on a war hero? Because he stopped playing along. 1996, Saipan. 52 years after the battle, 5 elderly Japanese men get off a plane. They have traveled from Japan specifically for this moment. They are looking for Guy Gabaldon. They find him at a veterans memorial ceremony. They approach him slowly, and then they bow. Deep, formal bows. One of them speaks in Japanese. He says, "You saved my life. I was in the cave. I have waited 50 years to say thank you." Another man says, "We brought our military records. We want to help you get the medal you deserve." They hand Guy folders full of documents, Japanese military logs, diary entries, witness statements, all confirming that Guy Gabaldon convinced far more than 1,500 people to surrender. The numbers they have documented exceed 2,000. Guy breaks down crying. Not because of the documents, but because after 50 years, someone finally believes him. Those 5 Japanese veterans start a campaign. They write to the United States Congress, to the President, to the Marine Corps. They say, "This man saved our lives when your country wanted us dead. Honor him." Some American veteran groups join the cause. Latino organizations, civil rights advocates. The pressure builds. 2006. Guy Gabaldon is 80 years old. He is dying of heart disease. There is one last push to get him the Medal of Honor before he passes. Congress holds a hearing. Japanese officials send a formal letter of support. Historians testify. The evidence is overwhelming. The Department of Defense reviews the case, and they say no. Their reason? Too much time has passed. The standards for Medal of Honor consideration have changed. Without contemporary documentation that meets current evidentiary requirements, they cannot proceed. Never mind that the contemporary documentation was deliberately suppressed. Guy Gabaldon dies on August 31st, 2006. He never gets his medal. But the story does not end there. Because in death, Guy Gabaldon becomes something the military could not control. He becomes a symbol. 2007. 1 year after Guy Gabaldon dies, a package arrives at the National Archives in Washington. No return address, just a postmark from Osaka, Japan. Inside are 63 letters, all written in Japanese, all from former Imperial Japanese Army soldiers who fought on Saipan. And every single one of them mentions Guy Gabaldon by name. The archivists do not know what to do with them, so they forward them to a translator at the Library of Congress. Her name is Emiko Tanaka. She is third-generation Japanese-American. Her grandfather fought for the U.S. and Europe while his family was in an internment camp. Emiko starts reading, and what she finds changes everything. These are not just thank you notes. These are confessions. One letter, from a man named Hiroshi Yamamoto, describes in detail how he and 47 other soldiers were ordered by their commanding officer to commit suicide rather than surrender. They were in a cave system, no food, no water, no ammunition. The officer told them it was their duty to die for the emperor. Hiroshi writes that they were tying grenades to their chests when they heard a voice, speaking Japanese, not the broken Japanese of American propaganda broadcasts. Perfect Japanese, respectful, calm. The voice said, "Your officer has already fled. He left you here to die while he escaped to the north. You owe him nothing." Hiroshi writes that he did not believe it at first. But then the voice described the exact route the officer had taken, the time he left, the boat he used, details no American should know. So Hiroshi went to check. He crawled to the back of the cave where the officer's quarters were. Empty. The officer's belongings were gone. He had abandoned them. Hiroshi came back and told the others. They argued for 20 minutes. Then, one by one, they put down the grenades and walked toward the voice. Guy Gabaldon was waiting at the cave entrance, alone, unarmed except for a pistol on his hip that he never touched. Hiroshi writes, "I am 84 years old now. I have grandchildren because of that boy. I have lived a full life because he gave me the chance. America never honored him properly. That is a shame that will stain your country forever." Emiko keeps reading. Letter after letter. Different men. Different battles. Same story. Guy Gabaldon appeared like a ghost, spoke like a countryman, saved their lives. But there is something else in these letters. Something stranger. Multiple men describe Guy as having an, quote, unusual presence. One letter says he seemed to know things he should not know. Another says he spoke with the authority of someone much older. A third letter describes him as, quote, touched by something beyond war. Emiko does not understand what that means. So she contacts one of the letter writers who is still alive, a man named Takeshi Nakamura, now 91 years old, living in Kyoto. They speak on the phone through a translator. Emiko asks him to explain what he meant by touched by something beyond war. Takeshi is silent for a long moment. Then he says, "Have you ever met someone who should not be alive? Who has walked through fire too many times and somehow never burns? That was him. We thought he was protected." Some of the men thought he was a kami himself, a spirit wearing a marine uniform. Emiko asks if he really believes that. Takeshi laughs. "I am a rational man. I do not believe in ghosts. But I also cannot explain how an 18-year-old boy convinced 2,000 trained soldiers to surrender when we had been taught since childhood that surrender was worse than death. So maybe I do not know what I believe." Emiko writes a report about the letters. She sends it to the Marine Corps Historical Division, to the Department of Defense, to every member of the Congressional Armed Services Committees. Most ignore it, but one person does not. Senator Barbara Boxer from California reads the report. She contacts Emiko, and then she does something unusual. She requests a classified briefing from the Department of Defense about psychological operations in the Pacific Theater during World War II. She wants to know if Guy Gabaldon was part of a program, if there is any documentation proving he was trained, deployed, and then deliberately hidden from history. The DoD tells her that most records from that era are either destroyed or remain classified for national security reasons. She asks what national security concerns could possibly still exist from a war that ended 60 years ago. They do not answer. So, Senator Boxer introduces a bill, the Guy Gabaldon Recognition Act. It does not demand a Medal of Honor. It simply demands transparency. Release the files. Declassify the reports. Let the public see what the military knows about Guy Gabaldon. The bill dies in committee. No vote, no debate. Just quietly shelved. But something unexpected happens. The media picks up the story. Not the mainstream networks. They ignore it. But independent journalists, podcasters, Documentary filmmakers, the kind of people who love digging into stories the government does not want told. 2010. A filmmaker named Robert Torres releases a documentary called The Invisible Marine. It features interviews with surviving members of Guy's unit, Japanese veterans who surrendered to him, military historians who have studied his tactics, and it includes something nobody has seen before: footage. A Marine combat cameraman named Eugene Davis filmed some of the Saipan campaign. Most of his footage is in the National Archives. Standard war documentary stuff: troops landing, artillery firing, generals giving orders. But Eugene kept some reels for himself, footage the military never asked for, and in 2009, a year before he died, he gave those reels to Robert Torres. One reel shows Guy Gabaldon walking a group of prisoners back to American lines. You can hear his voice off camera, speaking Japanese. The prisoners are not bound. They are not being marched at gunpoint. They are just walking with him, like he is leading a field trip. One prisoner is carrying a wounded Marine on his back. Guy convinced a Japanese soldier to help carry an injured American. The footage is 15 seconds long, but it is proof. Visual, undeniable proof of what Guy could do. The documentary goes viral online, millions of views. Comment sections explode with anger at the military, demands for justice, calls for posthumous recognition. 2014, California declares March 22nd as Guy Gabaldon Day, official state holiday. Schools teach his story. Murals go up in East LA. The federal government still refuses to act. But then, in 2018, something breaks open. A historian named Dr. Patricia Delgado files a Freedom of Information Act request for all documents related to Subject G in OSS files. She has been researching this for 6 years. She knows the loopholes. She knows how to word the request so it cannot be easily denied. And after 2 years of legal back and forth, the government releases a file, heavily redacted, but not completely. On page 47, there is a memo dated June 1955. It is from the Department of Defense to the Office of the Secretary of the Navy. The subject line reads, Gabaldon Medal of Honor Case, Final Disposition. Most of the text is blacked out, but 2 sentences remain. Quote, Subject's methods, while effective, represent a deviation from approved combat doctrine that, if publicly celebrated, could undermine confidence in conventional military operations. Recommendation: deny elevation to Medal of Honor. Maintain minimal public acknowledgement to avoid precedent-setting implications for future unconventional warfare tactics. There it is, in black and white. They denied him the medal, not because he did not earn it, but because honoring him would prove that there are better ways to fight than the ways that make defense contractors rich. Dr. Delgado publishes the memo. It explodes. News outlets finally pay attention. Veterans groups demand accountability. Even some active duty service members speak out, saying this is exactly the kind of corruption that destroys trust in leadership. The Secretary of Defense issues a statement. We honor all who serve. The Gabaldon case will be reviewed with fresh eyes. That was 6 years ago. Still no medal. Still no justice. But the letters keep coming, from Japan, from former prisoners and their children and their grandchildren, all saying the same thing: we are alive because of him, and you let him die without honoring what he did. Let me tell you what they do not want you to know. In 2019, the Department of Defense commissioned an internal study. They wanted to analyze the most cost-effective combat operations in American military history, efficiency measured by lives saved per dollar spent. Tactical success versus resource expenditure. The study was never meant to be public, but a congressional staffer leaked portions of it to ProPublica in 2021. Guy Gabaldon's operations on Saipan ranked number 3. Out of every military action analyzed from 1776 to 2019, number 3. He saved an estimated 4,000 lives, American and Japanese combined. That accounts for the people who did not die in combat because they surrendered, plus the ripple effect of those prisoners not being in future battles, plus the civilians who did not commit suicide. 4,000 lives, using 0 artillery shells, 0 airstrikes, 0 tanks, just words. The cost to the military? 1 private first-class salary, $40 a month in 1944. Call it $500 total for his entire Saipan deployment. Do the math. That is 8 lives saved per dollar spent. Compare that to the Battle of Iwo Jima. 26,000 American casualties, 70,000 total casualties on both sides. Cost? Over $800 million in today's money. Guy Gabaldon proved you could win a war without fighting it. And that is exactly why they buried his story. Because wars are not just about winning, they are about profit. In 1961, President Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex, the idea that defense contractors, military leadership, and politicians have a financial incentive to keep wars going, to keep conflicts expensive, to keep buying tanks and planes and missiles. Guy Gabaldon is the antithesis of that system. He represents a kind of warfare that cannot be monetized. You cannot sell empathy to Raytheon. You cannot get a government contract for cultural understanding. So they erased him. Not completely. That would be too obvious. But enough. Downgrade the numbers. Deny the medal. Let the story fade. Except it did not fade. 2023. A high school teacher in Los Angeles named Maria Gutierrez assigns her students a project. Research an unsung hero from your community. One student, a kid named Diego, chooses Guy Gabaldon because his great-grandfather knew him. Diego goes deep. He tracks down descendants of Japanese soldiers who surrendered to Guy. He finds the leaked DoD memo. He puts together a presentation that goes viral on TikTok. 15 million views in a week. The comments section becomes a movement. People start demanding answers. Why does Audie Murphy have movies, video games, and monuments, while Guy Gabaldon has nothing? Why are white war heroes celebrated and Latino war heroes forgotten? The pressure builds. Again. Like it has every 10 years since Guy died. And this time, something shifts. In October 2023, the Secretary of Defense announces a comprehensive review of Minority Medal of Honor denials. 27 cases, spanning from World War I to Vietnam. Guy Gabaldon is on the list. The review is supposed to take 6 months. It has been over a year. No updates, no timeline, just bureaucratic silence. But here is what I think is really happening. I think they know they were wrong. I think the evidence is overwhelming. I think every historian, every military analyst, every person who has looked at this case honestly has reached the same conclusion. Guy Gabaldon earned the Medal of Honor. Multiple times over. But giving it to him now, 18 years after his death, 79 years after his actions, means admitting something far more damaging than a simple mistake. It means admitting the system is rigged. That heroism is political. That your value as a soldier depends on your skin color and whether your story serves the narrative they want to sell. It means admitting that for 8 decades, the United States military has prioritized optics over honor, profit over truth. And that is a pill they do not want to swallow. So, what is Guy Gabaldon's real legacy? It is not a medal. It is not a statue. It is not even his name in a history book. His legacy is proof that the individual human being, armed with nothing but courage and compassion, can accomplish what billion-dollar war machines cannot. He proved that seeing your enemy as a person is not weakness. It is the ultimate strength. He proved that the most dangerous weapon in any conflict is not technology. It is understanding. And most importantly, he proved that the people in power will always fear those who demonstrate that violence is a choice, not a necessity. Because if everyone knew what Guy Gabaldon knew, if every soldier believed what he believed, wars would be a lot harder to start. There is a reason they teach soldiers to dehumanize the enemy, to call them gooks, or hajis, or tangos, anything but people. Because the moment you see them as someone's son, someone's father, someone who is just as terrified as you are, it becomes nearly impossible to pull the trigger. Guy Gabaldon refused to dehumanize, and he won anyway. That is the conspiracy. Not that they hid his story, but why they hid it. They hid it because Guy Gabaldon is dangerous, not to enemy soldiers, to the system that needs enemy soldiers to exist. In 2024, a group of Japanese-American veterans, Latino advocacy organizations, and military reform activists launched a final campaign. They are not asking for a Medal of Honor anymore. They are demanding it. They have filed lawsuits. They have lobbied Congress. They have organized protests at the Pentagon. And they have made one thing very clear. This is not about one man. This is about every marginalized soldier who did something extraordinary and got erased. Every hero who did not fit the approved narrative. Guy Gabaldon died, waiting for recognition. But his story is alive, and it is growing, because every person who hears it realizes the same thing. We have been lied to about what heroism looks like, about what strength means, about what it takes to win. Guy Gabaldon walked into the darkness alone, unarmed, and defeated fear itself, not with a gun, with his voice. And 80 years later, the people who profit from fear are still trying to silence him. They will not succeed. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you think differently about war or heroism or what we owe the people who serve, do me a favor, share it, comment. Let people know this is not ancient history. This is happening right now. The fight for Guy Gabaldon's recognition is still going. And if you want to go deeper into stories like this, stories about the people history tried to erase, the truths buried in classified files, hit that subscribe button. I am not going anywhere. And neither is the truth. Thanks for watching. And remember, the most powerful weapon is the one they do not want you to have.